So Massachusetts Appleseed's mission is to promote equal rights and opportunities for Massachusetts residents by developing and advocating for systemic solutions to social justice issues. We use powerful research to highlight problems and propose solutions, and then we advocate zealously to implement those solutions so that everyday people can exercise their legal rights and achieve meaningful access to critical services and opportunities. Our report, Families Torn Apart, Language-Based Discrimination at the Massachusetts Department of Children and Families, is the culmination of 2 years of investigative research by Massachusetts Appleseed into the language access practices at the Massachusetts Department of Children and Families. The Department of Children and Families, often referred to as DCF, is the Massachusetts statewide child welfare agency. The department is in charge of the Massachusetts foster care system and investigates cases of alleged parental neglect and abuse. Mass Appleseed chose DCF to investigate precisely because of this extremely important mission and because the agency has the immense power to separate children from their parents. While the sad truth is that separation is sometimes necessary, the fact is that it results in extreme trauma for both parents and children. And the decision to remove a child from their family should never have anything to do with the fact that the parent or parents do not speak English. Unfortunately, our findings showed that this is too often not the case. In our report, we found that DCF is failing to meet their federal obligation to provide meaningful access to their services for those who are limited English proficient, which is to say people who have a limited ability to speak, write, or understand English. In Massachusetts, 9% of our state population is considered limited English proficient, or LEP for short. And similarly, around 9% of DCF's service population speaks a primary language other than English. Our report shows that those LEP families are more likely to be separated than English-speaking families. We found that severe issues with DCF's provision of interpretation services, translation services, and social services combine to create an environment in which LEP parents are unable to understand DCF's investigative process, what type of social service programs they must attend, and how likely it is that they will be able to maintain or regain custody of their child. Such a lack of understanding makes it practically impossible for many LEP parents to meet DCF's expectations, leading LEP parents to be often falsely labeled uninterested in their children or non-compliant with DCF's requests. Because caseworkers don't bring interpreters on their home visits, because important documents are given to LEP clients in English rather than their primary language, and because DCF assigns parents to attend social services, such as therapy or parenting classes, in a language they don't speak, LEP parents lack the opportunity to meaningfully comprehend or participate in DCF's process. The consequences of this reality are enormous. Most significantly, our report describes the immense trauma children of LEP parents experience as a direct result of these language access failures on the part of DCF. Our report details how this discrimination at DCF is systemic, and we provide a number of actionable recommendations to realistically fix this broken system that would help ensure that DCF prioritizes the provision of language access in their trainings, hiring, and organizational culture. We also include recommendations for the external enforcement of language access through groups such as the Committee for Public Counsel Services, the Massachusetts Civil Rights Legal Community, and the Massachusetts Legislature. By embracing a multi-tiered plan for change, we believe that Massachusetts can prevent families from being torn apart unjustly due to failures of language access, and we will work with our partners and allies across the state to see that this vision can become a reality. I'd now like to introduce the first of 4 speakers here with us today, Darlene Spencer. Darlene is currently serving as the Director of Family Support Initiatives at the United Way of Greater New Bedford, a position she has held since April 2007. Prior to this position, she worked for the Department of Children and Families for 23 years, where she held various social work positions. Thank you, Darlene.
Thank you, Deb. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. First, I want to thank Massachusetts Appleseed Center for Law and Justice for lifting the voices of those in our Commonwealth whose English speaking ability is limited and hinders their access to needed services. As Deb said, my name is Darlene Spencer, and as stated in my introduction, I am currently the director of the Family Resource and Development Center that is operated by United Way of Greater New Bedford. Prior to this position, I was a social worker at the Department of Children and Families for over 23 years. In both these positions, I have supported families that are non-English speaking or whose ability to speak English is limited. In the last 13 years, 75% of the families I work with have been non-English speaking families who have utilized the Family Resource and Development Center as a place to not only access services in their language, but as part of their support system in navigating many systems, including DCF, that are foreign to them. As social workers, we go into this important work of supporting families with an open heart and an open mind. Unfortunately, it is the largest system that impedes the work as social workers that we set out to do. I speak Cape Verdean Creole, and when I worked at DCF, I carried extremely high caseload in the Brockton office, where they had a limited number of bilingual staff. I saw firsthand how the department faces challenges meeting the needs of non-English speaking families. I know that interpreters can be used for scheduled visits, but what happens when a hotline call comes in at 3 a.m. for a non-English speaking family? The likelihood of accessing translation services at 3 a.m. is very unlikely. And even when there are translators, it does not make up for the culturally competent assessment and support that is given to parents when a social worker that speaks their language. I also saw that non-English speaking families weren't getting essential documents like action plans translated, and this still happens today. The burden gets placed on the few bilingual workers who are in the department to fill the needs of all non-English speaking families can be an impossible task. Many social workers who are bilingual or multilingual are thrust into a social service, human service system that already does not have adequate services that are in the language of the families that they support. Bilingual workers end up being everything to families because they speak the family's language, which eventually leads to burnout. DCF does not fully support the few bilingual workers they have, leading many bilingual workers to seek jobs elsewhere and creating more gaps for families in the DCF system. Because as a system, DCF does not sufficiently support non-English speaking families or their bilingual workers, language barriers prevent families from meaningfully participating in DCF's process. And they're not able to take the actions the agency requires, or they can misunderstand what the department expects of them. As a result, non-English speaking parents can be seen as non-compliant or even uninterested in reuniting with their children. Not understanding is not the same as not complying or not caring. I am hopeful that this report will lay the groundwork for creating a system for limited English speaking parents to be able to access services so that they can be the best parents they want and can be. Thank you.
Thank you, Darlene. Next, we'll be hearing from Juan Abad, a Spanish-speaking parent previously involved with the Department of Children and Families, and his former attorney, Jessica Salinas Thomas.
Good morning, everyone. Juan Abad is a former client of mine. He's a primarily Spanish-speaking father who came here from the Dominican Republic. His involvement with DCF began in 2013 when his son was 3 months old and removed from the care of the other parent under very tragic circumstances in which the child's twin was murdered. Although the child was placed with an English-speaking only foster family, the goal was immediately changed to adoption by this family, although Juan sought custody as soon as he learned of this horrific situation. This was a very complicated case. Juan and I worked together for about 4 years, 2+ years of which we were in trial. The trial lasted over 100 non-consecutive days. Juan and his son were separated during this entire time, although the child had been taken into DCF custody due to no fault of Juan's. Language access was not the sole issue, but it certainly was a large issue in the case. In fact, DCF used the language issues to blatantly discriminate against Juan and try to make the hurdles so great that he could not overcome them. This discrimination began at the initiation of the case when Juan was assigned a DCF social worker who only spoke English and did not use certified interpreters, or often didn't use interpreters at all. It continued throughout the case. DCF repeatedly told Juan to not speak his only language, Spanish, to his child during his visits, and initially refused to let the child's older siblings, who arrived to the United States in 2015, to have any contact with their younger sibling because they did not speak English. When DCF provided reports and plans to Juan, they were entirely in English or were only partially translated, leaving out any information about DCF's obligations or the obligations of the foster parents. Interpretation at case reviews were generally done by interpreters who did not properly interpret what was being said, and in fact, did not interpret most of what other people were saying. At his son's many medical appointments, Juan was expected to request his own interpreter ahead of time without any explanation of the process to do so. These are just a few examples of this discrimination that occurred. I am happy to report that we prevailed at trial and Juan has been successfully raising his son along with the son's siblings. His son today is a happy, healthy, bilingual child with very few of the medical issues he had while in foster care. So without further ado, I present Juan Abad, who will tell you his own story.
Sí, buenos días para todos.
Good morning to all.
Dios bendiga a cada uno de que están conectados a este chat de Zoom.
God bless each and every one of the people who are in this chat today.
Dios bendiga también a las compañías Appleseed por una
God bless also Appleseed
y al departamento que está presente, a cada uno que están presentes. Dios los bendiga mucho.
and each of the departments present today. God bless you a lot.
Yo, el DCF en el 2013 sacó al niño de su madre. Por una
Back in
situación
2013, the CF took the child from his mother
y tomó custodia, DCF tomó custodia del niño
and took custody of the child.
y fue enviado el niño a una casa de padre foster
And placed him with a foster care family.
donde padres que no hablaban español.
In an English-speaking household.
Después, al tiempo, me asignaron una trabajadora social que tampoco hablaba español.
Then I was assigned a social worker who didn't speak Spanish either.
El niño desde 3 meses, que tenía 3 meses.
The child was 3 months old then.
Era un poco muy difícil porque ella no hablaba español y yo tampoco hablaba inglés.
It was a little too difficult because she didn't speak Spanish and I didn't speak English either.
También en la cita médica no podía no entendernos.
At the medical appointments for my son, we couldn't understand each other either.
Cuando iba a la visita a mi casa tampoco yo podía entender.
And I had visits at my home, I couldn't understand either.
Visita supervisada.
During the supervised visits,
Era muy difícil
it was
conectar
very
a la
difficult.
comprensión. Yo nunca había tenido entendimiento sobre lo que era el DCF. No entendía nada sobre la familia que sacan los niños, no entendía nada de eso porque el niño lo sacaron fue de su madre, no de mí.
All that was new to me. I was not familiar with the DCF process because the child wasn't taken from me. He was taken from his mother. So everything was totally new to me.
Pero yo entendí que tenía que tirar hacia adelante para sacar a mi hijo, ya que la madre no lo podía tener. Creías que lo más conveniente era estar con su padre.
But since the mother couldn't have him, I considered the best thing for the child to be with his father. So I pursued that.
Entonces, al mucho tiempo después, me pusieron un trabajador que sí hablaba español como secundario.
After a long time, they assigned a secondary social worker to my case.
Y él viene a una visita en mi casa con la trabajadora social que no hablaba español.
So he would come to my house with the social worker who didn't speak Spanish.
Y él me dice a mí que yo soy su nuevo trabajador social del secundario
And told me he was my secondary social worker.
y yo quiero decirle a usted que no
And
le
I want
hable,
to tell you
que no le hable a su hijo en español.
not to talk to your child in Spanish.
Yo me sentí un poco frustrado porque yo decía, pero yo nada más sé hablar español, yo no sé hablar otro idioma.
I felt frustrated because I only could speak Spanish. I didn't know any other language.
Solamente yo cumplo los reglamentos de DCF, contestó él, y yo no tengo que ver como con su problema que usted no hable inglés. Simplemente yo le digo que en la visita que yo tenga con usted, que trate de no hablarle al niño en español.
I'm just telling you the guidelines of DCF. You have to try to talk to your son in English only.
Yo me quedé un poco bien, wow, yo quería hacer un esfuerzo de cómo de una vez busqué lugares para apuntarme para hablar inglés, pero se me hacía difícil porque el niño tenía muchas complicaciones. Casi la semana entera era de appointment en appointment.
I really wanted to make an effort to learn English, even try to enroll in English classes, but it was so complicated for me because every week he had so many medical appointments that I had to go to that I didn't have the time.
Ellos me decían que yo no podía perder ni una cita médica.
And I was told that I couldn't miss any medical appointment or any visit.
Dudamos en ese proceso por lo medio de 5 años.
That process lasted about 5 years.
Y yo sin saber, yo no entendía, yo le preguntaba por qué por qué no me dan mi hijo. Yo puedo, y ellos me decían, no, es que usted no habla inglés.
This process was so long, and all along I didn't know what was going on with the process. I couldn't understand English. I just remember asking, why don't you give me my son? I want my son. And they said, no, you don't speak English.
Después llegan los hijos míos de Santo Domingo.
Then my 2 older sons came from Santo Domingo to the United States, to America.
Y yo rápidamente le informé a ellos que mis hijos hubiesen llegado de Santo Domingo para ver
And I notified to them that they came to the U.S.
para ver si yo podía hacer una cita para que ellos conozcan a su hermano.
To try to make an appointment for them to meet their brother.
Y cuando él me dijo, Juan, lamentablemente ya yo investigué todo, he hablado con mis supervisores y sus hijos no pueden asistir a la visita porque sus hijos no hablan inglés.
And I was told, Juan, unfortunately, after reviewing the situation, your sons cannot meet your younger son because they speak English.
Yo me quedé un poco, yo dije, wow, pero Dios mío, ¿qué es lo que yo estoy pagando? ¿Por qué no puede? Porque yo no hablo, porque son su hermano. Eso no tiene que ver, eso no es culpa de los niños.
I wonder what I was doing wrong. God, what am I paying for? These are their brothers. They want to meet their brother.
Él me dijo, yo le dije que si, después otra vez le dije otra vez que si podía, me dijo, Juan, le ha dicho que usted ni puede llevar los hijos. Yo estaba en ese tiempo muy con los dos niños aquí. Una vez los llevé yo a una visita y llevé los hijos míos. Me dijo, usted no puede traer los niños porque sus hijos no hablan español. Su cita será cancelada.
I brought my sons to one visit once because I wanted them to meet the brother. And they said, Juan, you cannot bring your sons here because they don't speak English. So we're going to cancel your appointment, your visit.
Después también, pero todo el tiempo la trabajadora primaria era que ibas a toda la cita médica y ella me decía que yo tenía que buscar un intérprete, pero ella no me explicaban cómo. Una vez yo pensaba que era que yo llevara un intérprete mío, yo no sabía nada del proceso. Y cuando yo llevé a una persona, ella me dijo no, pero yo dije, pero él habla inglés y español. Y me dijo, no, usted tiene que pedirle usted aquí. Digo, pero ¿cómo lo voy a pedir si ellos todos hablan inglés? Yo no sé hablar.
My primary social worker is the one who would attend all the visits and all the medical appointments. And since we couldn't understand each other, she told me once that I had to arrange for my own interpreter, and I thought that I could bring somebody from a person who I knew or somebody. And so I brought somebody with me at the appointment, and she said, no, you cannot bring anybody. You have to request an interpreter from here. But they never told me how to do that.
Pero ella no me lo hubiese explicado ni me había dicho nada.
She never explained to me how to do it, how to get an interpreter from there.
También fue un poco muy difícil cuando él vio que todos los niños, cuando él ya vio, él me pidió todos los documentos. El trabajador social me pidió todos los documentos de los hijos míos, me pidió que le entregara pasaporte, que le entregara residencia, le tuve que entregar la residencia, pasaporte, seguro social. Y me dijo, yo tengo que tener todo eso. Y me dijo, ¿y cómo usted trajo esos niños aquí? Y yo quiero decirle que usted ahora se le va a abrir un caso a esos dos niños.
So the social worker started questioning me about how I brought my other sons to America, and he asked me for their passports, their social security cards, the proof of residence, and all these papers. And he told me that they were going to open a case for them too.
Y yo él involucró a los otros dos hijos míos y me pedían todos. Yo tenía que llevarle todo de la escuela, toda la vacuna. Tuve que darle los teléfonos de cuando ellos se apuntaron en la escuela, todo eso. Pero era con una opresión que mis hijos, yo le entregaba la nota que sacaban as y todo eso. Él me decía, no, es que ellos no hablan, ellos todavía, digo, sí, ellos están aprendiendo y ellos saben hablar inglés. No, pero todavía no es el tiempo. O sea que para poder dar visita a los hijos míos, tuvimos que ir frente a un juez. El DCE no accedió a darme visita a los hijos míos hasta que no acudimos que el juez ordenó.
So he involved them also in the process, and they started requesting vaccination records, school records, and I couldn't see my sons until the judge ordered so.
Después también sobre el lenguaje, en los fotos que review, todos los reportes yo quería, porque cada vez que daban un photo review, yo pensaba que ya yo había ganado el niño, pues yo me digo, bueno, si salgo bien aquí me van a entregar el niño. Yo hacía todo lo que ellos me pedían, nunca fui con nada falta, todo completo, y siempre se inventaban algo sobre el lenguaje.
I used to do everything I was told, and I thought I was doing so well at the foster care review reports, but they always found something related to the language.
Y todos los reportes eran en inglés.
And all the reports were in English.
A veces los intérpretes tampoco no interpretaban bien porque después yo me salían, yo dije, no, yo no dije así, fue así que yo, oh, siempre había una confusión que hay que tener mucho cuidado sobre eso.
The interpreters also sometimes didn't do a good job. Sometimes I would say, I didn't say that. I said something else. I said it the other way. And they would say, oh, and there was confusion about that.
Y desde un niño con 3 meses viendo todas las calificaciones y viendo todo, tuvimos que esperar 5 años para poderme entregar a mi hijo. Yo gasté todos mis recursos detrás de mi hijo con toda mi fuerza para adelante y todo el tiempo hacía todo lo que ellos me decían, forzado todo el tiempo. Pero ellos no miraban nada de eso, ellos siempre miraban el lado oscuro. No sé cómo que pensaban. Yo creo que una persona profesional tiene que mirar y tiene que saber lidiar con cada persona. Para eso se hacen profesionales, para saber ayudar a los demás. Y estoy muy alegre con la compañía Appleseed, que sé que van a ayudarla mucho porque hay muchos padres que pueden tener sus hijos y como también entiendo que hay muchos que no pueden tenerlo por algunas situaciones que le es daño a sus hijos, pero cuando una persona es buen padre y lucha, yo creo que tienen derechos a entregarle a su familia, no importando el idioma.
I used all my resources on this, and I fought with all my heart since my son was 3 months old until he was 5 years old. And they always, throughout the process, they only concentrated in the dark side. I don't know why they made it so hard for me. I think professional stuff is professional precisely because they have the tools to help people. And I'm very thankful with Appleseed. And I think that good parents should have the access to their kids much sooner than that.
Sorry, still figuring out the Zoom after all this. Anyway, I just want to say thank you so much, Juan, for taking the time to share your story with us and for having the courage to speak out. We really appreciate that. Next, before I introduced our next speakers, I wanted to also mention that and acknowledge that Martina Mata from Senator Sal DiDomenico's office is also with us here today. Senator DiDomenico, along with Representatives Adrian, Madaro, and Representative Joan Meschino, will be filing legislation that we recommend in our report. And our next speakers are Representative Madaro and Representative Meschino. These are 2 state legislators committed to addressing the systemic issues at DCF and at state agencies across the Commonwealth. And they'll be speaking about the forthcoming civil rights legislation that we recommend in our report. I believe Representative Madaro, are you speaking first?
I believe so. Thank you, Deb. Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Adrian Madaro, and I'm proud to serve as the state representative for the 1st Suffolk District, which covers East Boston. I want to thank the Massachusetts Appleseed Center for Law and Justice for bringing us together this morning and for your important work on the Families Torn Apart report. Thank you also to my colleague, Representative Meschino, for your tireless efforts in supporting civil rights, and to everyone on this call for making time to join us today. I hope you've all been staying safe and healthy. Juan, I also want to express my gratitude to you for your courage in sharing your personal story with us. It's certainly not easy sharing personal stories like this, especially in front of strangers, but we are grateful for your willingness to do so. It's really important that we shed light on the injustices that you and so many other families experience so that we can begin to correct them. The Families Torn Apart report highlights the destructive impact of language-based discrimination in the Department of Children and Families. State agencies like DCF, like the Department of Unemployment Assistance, and many others entangle families and workers in complex processes that determine the fate of their family structure and their ability to support themselves. Yet, we've seen across the board that there's an inconsistency in interpretation and language access services for residents with limited English proficiency, making these already complex processes even more unnavigable for those families and individuals. This session, I'm excited to be partnering with the Language Access Coalition, including Massachusetts Appleseed, the Mass Law Reform Institute, and MIRA, the Massachusetts Immigrant and Refugee Advocacy Coalition, to introduce legislation to mandate, standardize, and enforce language access requirements for state-funded programs within the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. This bill will require state agencies to translate their websites and documents and to provide oral interpretation services into non-English languages spoken across the Commonwealth, including an American Sign Language. It will also establish a language access advisory board to provide oversight and technical assistance and mechanisms to provide relief to those who have not received adequate language access. This legislation will ensure that all residents of Massachusetts are able to equitably access their own government and the services they need. Just as importantly, this legislation will affirm that language-based discrimination has no place in the Commonwealth. I'm also proud to be working in partnership with my colleague, Representative Joan Meschino, to file an act to create access to justice this session to ensure that our civil rights are enforced. As you will hear in more detail from the representative, this bill will give our communities the opportunity in court to seek redress for disparate impacts and discrimination. I'm committed to standing with fellow representatives, advocates, language access experts, and communities with limited English proficiency like mine in East Boston to make sure that these much needed proposals become a reality. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you, Representative Madaro. And our next speaker is Representative Joan Meschino.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Joan Meschino, and I am the state representative for the 3rd Plymouth district, which includes the towns of Cohasset, Hingham, Hull, and Scituate on the South Shore. For those of you who are interested in learning more about me, please visit my website at joanmeschino.com. I would like to start by congratulating the Massachusetts Appleseed Center for Law and Justice and my good friend Deb Silva for their insightful research and thoughtful recommendations and what I think is a really excellent report, Families Torn Apart. This one is a little near and dear to my heart. As the former executive director of Mass Appleseed, I really just applaud Deb Silva on how she has been just embodying the true mission of access to justice for people in Massachusetts. Really applaud you, Deb, for the great work that you're doing on a lot of fronts. But this one is particularly poignant. I'd also like to thank Senor Juan Abad for sharing your personal story with us. Appleseed does data, research, analysis, conclusions, and these things can be very sterile. But Senor, you shared with us your personal story and showed us the very real risks to the child and to your family that arise from the language barriers that you encountered through the DCF process and the bias that you encountered. And you made it very clear both what the opportunities for systemic reform are and the urgency for action. As Americans, we celebrate equality, civil rights. On the federal level, it's Title VI, Section 601 and 602 of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that provides a right to be free from discrimination based on race or color or national origin. Similarly, the Massachusetts Constitution, in conjunction with State Executive Order 526, also provides clear protections from discrimination. And I would argue, for the most part, in Massachusetts, we enjoy the daily benefits and privileges afforded to us by local, state, and federal government through laws and regulations and programs. However, as my colleague, Representative Madaro said, it is one thing to have rights. It is another thing to be able to enforce and access those rights. My colleague and partner in social justice, Representative Madaro, and I will be filing an Access to Justice bill this session entitled An Act to Create Access to Justice, which would restore the right of an individual to bring a claim in state court against a state government agency when policies or procedures have a disparate impact on an individual who designated as a protected class under Massachusetts state law. Now, what this means is that the individual would have the right to bring a lawsuit, a civil rights claim, arising out of that government policy or regulation that appears on its surface to be non-discriminatory, but actually has a discriminatory effect on a protected group of people when it is implemented. In this situation, Senor Abad is a person with limited English proficiency, which makes him part of a protected class. The Department of Children and Families' failure to provide federally mandated language access resources to him violated the Abad family civil rights. And Senor Abad was represented by an attorney in the child care and protection proceedings. And so he had an attorney to help him finally navigate the agency's proceedings and to get past those language barriers. However, if we pass this Access to Justice bill, Senor Abad would also be able to seek relief on the violations directly. And that's important because that is a mechanism for systemic reform, using his individual case to make the system better for all of the children and families that come behind and follow after. They shouldn't have, we learn from experience. We shouldn't have to continue to suffer from his experience. So the bill provides claimants an injunctive and equitable relief, which includes an award for damages and attorney's fees. Again, access to justice, because most people can't afford an attorney and most people can't afford to sustain these lawsuits in courts. It's expensive. So that's also an important access to the courts piece. And then if discrimination is intentional, doesn't need to be, but if it is, a claimant could also be awarded punitive damages as well. You know, today we're talking about language barriers. However, this bill would actually create access to justice for Massachusetts residents across many sectors, including the environment, healthcare, education, and that promotes overall social justice across the Commonwealth. I came to this bill looking at it through an environmental justice lens, but it has very real positive benefits across a whole spectrum of civil rights that are preserved in our Constitution. My colleague, Representative Madaro, and I are very much approaching this as a dialogue with all stakeholders, including the state agencies that would be responsible for enforcing these rights, as well as potentially defending these rights. And the goal is to enfranchise individuals to avail themselves of the civil rights that we should all be able to enjoy and celebrate. I look forward to working with my colleague, Representative Madaro, to introduce this bill again this session. We are working, as he said, with a large coalition of advocates who represent many of the constituencies, a few of which I just referenced, who would benefit from this bill. We are pleased and delighted to count Massachusetts Appleseed among this coalition, and we're very much excited to work with Mass Appleseed and all of the coalition members as we move forward. And I just want to thank everyone for including me in this, and to again congratulate Massachusetts Appleseed on their fantastic report.
Thank you so much, Rep. Meschino and Rep. Madaro. This concludes the speaking portion of our event today. If there are folks who have questions, we'd be very happy to try to answer those for you. But again, thank you to all of our speakers today and to all of you who joined us. We're looking forward to working with, hopefully with DCF themselves, but also with other partners to try to improve language access across the Commonwealth.
Deb, may I read from the chat for a moment?
Oh, sure.
Martina Matas thanks us for shedding this much needed spotlight on this life-changing issue. And although the senator was not able to join us today, he wanted to, oops, excuse me, I have a little cat here. Even though he was eager to file this civil rights protection in the Senate and to advocate for this bill and to be a partner with us in that. And he wanted to thank you so much for this essential report.
Perfect, thank you. And if there are folks who have questions, I guess the best way for us to receive those is through the chat, and then we can try to respond to those. And if not, then thank you very much, and we look forward to working with you. Let's see. Looks like we have a few questions coming in. Robert Hernandez asks, have you considered the costs up front to bring cases? Having to wait until the end to recover costs is a major obstacle to justice under civil rights statutes. So I guess that's for the representatives primarily. And Shira Schoenberg also asks, I think this is a good follow-up, can you explain, Rep. Meschino, why someone currently is unable to file a discrimination suit in this case?
So in fact, there are some avenues to redress discrimination. I'm sure you've all heard of the MCAD, the Mass Commission Against Discrimination. And so there are some administrative opportunities. And in fact, MCAD does a tremendous amount of work. You know, most people think of them in terms of employment, but in fact, they do a lot of a broad range. They reach broadly across discrimination. And so they are a very valuable partner in this. That is an administrative agency. And so what this particular bill would say is that you can, in certain instances, go straight to court. And sometimes there are real reasons why one needs to do that. We are working with MCAD to figure out what the interplay would be, because MCAD is a tremendous resource. There's a lot of value for going through that administrative process. It doesn't capture everything. So certainly there are places where we need to align this. This bill is responsive to a 2001 US Supreme Court case under the original civil rights legislation. Everybody had this right at the federal and state level to bring a case directly. The Alexander v. Sandoval case was what changed, really, it was what changed the standards. And it said that you had to show intent for discrimination, which is an impossible standard. It's tremendously difficult. And in fact, there really haven't been many cases successfully in doing that. So what this does is it really sort of flips that around to the other side of the coin that says sometimes even well-intentioned regulations and laws or actions like a DCF, right? It's there to protect children. That is their mission. That is not inherently discriminatory. However, sometimes there are parts of it and changes in policies and things like that, as was well described here, that have a disparate impact. And it's that piece that we're trying to get at. So people, there are some avenues to court for some of these things. If you think fair housing, or if you think sex discrimination or gender discrimination, there are some avenues, but it's not across the board, and it's not consistent across standards. And so that's the piece that the representative and I are trying to, and the senator, excuse me, are trying to get to. Rep. Madaro, would you like to add anything to that?
You summed it up perfectly, Joan. Thank you.
And I would just add that we actually do go through in the report the legal standard under Title VI, and we acknowledge that there are some state level administrative processes. The problem is that, at least at DCF, nobody seems to know about them. And actually, one of our recommendations was that those processes be publicized more, so that the folks do know that they have the right to file a complaint. but it's true that that DCF and other agencies, including the MCD, are, you know, are overburdened with their primary mission, and that's why I think the right to go directly to court is so important. Any other questions? I should say that our speakers, I believe, would also be available after the conference if folks have questions later on and would like to follow up. Okay, well, it seems like there are no other questions at this time, so I'll conclude the event. Oh, I see that also for those of you who are still logged on, we have the link to the report in the chat. You can also get the look at the report on our website, massappleseed.org. Thank you again all for coming. We really appreciate your support and look forward to working with many of you to work on the recommendations in our report and implementing those and creating more language access for LEP individuals in the Commonwealth. Thanks.